I think it goes without saying retail crime isn't the occasional headline, it's the everyday reality. And, for us, a third of our incidents come from repeat offenders across multiple stores. And so repeat offenders are several times more likely to carry weapons and making every confrontation more volatile for our folks. And so there's a human toll on morale and retention and just how safe our employees and customers feel being in our stores. And I think about, we've made a ton of progress. And I think even with that progress, we recognize there's still a lot of work to do.
You're listening to the Retail Crime Intelligence Podcast by Auror, where we share actionable insights to help you reduce crime and violence in your stores. Thanks everyone for joining us. Excited to be on yet another LPF webinar with some close friends of mine that I am excited to walk through the topic we have today when we think about leading a connected response to crime and all of the different technologies, individuals, and different organizations that are a part of, just addressing retail crime and violence in our community. And there's a lot more that we can do. And I know at Auror, we're excited to have partnered with Axon and building a bunch of different technologies that will help streamline a lot of this. But one of the biggest things is just learning from those experts that have lived the life, right? The experts that have lived the law enforcement life, that have dealt with retail crime on the law enforcement side. Those experts that have dealt with retail crime on the retail side. And so that's really what today is all about. We're going to have as they like to say, a fireside chat, which is basically me asking these fine gentlemen I have on the call a bunch of different questions and just to get their insights. I've got an awesome panel here. We got my friend Seth Hughes joining me. Seth, recent addition to the Axon team and the Vice President of Retail Strategy and Innovation over there for them. But Seth, before that, was at Walgreens, was at Target, was at REI. He is a master of retail, I would say. Next up is Mr. Brian Friedman. So Brian, the Division Vice President of Asset Protection of Risk Management at REI. Brian has had a long career in retail as well. He's a former targeteer like Seth and I, and so spent a lot of time over there and a couple other roles. We've got Lieutenant Eugene Kim on the webinar as well. So Lieutenant brings a wealth of knowledge from the law enforcement space. He's currently with the Beverly Hills Police Department. Thank you, Lieutenant, for jumping on. We know how precious the time is on the law enforcement side, so appreciate you making the time here today. Last but not least, a very good friend of mine. Unfortunately, he has to work with me day in and day out. My friend Raul Aguilar, who right now, today, is the Senior Director of Law Enforcement Partnerships for us here at Auror. But Raul comes, and if you don't know Raul, I would say you should reach out to him. He has a wealth of knowledge from his time at HSI. So 25 plus year career with HSI doing awesome work, and was the leader of Operation Bowling Point, which really was the tip of the spear when we think about dealing with retail crime. So that's our panel here today. Appreciate you all making the time. So, Brian, looking at you first. We hear a lot around retail crime, and it's escalating into a lot more violence, and it's morphed beyond just trying to catch shoplifters and that type of approach we've seen. Brian, you're living it firsthand. Your team at REI is living it firsthand. Give me your perspective on the employee and customer impact when it comes to the state of retail crime right now.
I think it goes without saying retail crime isn't the occasional headline, it's the everyday reality. And, for us, a third of our incidents come from repeat offenders across multiple stores. And so everyone on this call has probably been or is familiar with the complexities that come with that and whatnot. And so I think about, the things that keep me up at night, regarding the safety of our employees. Repeat offenders are several times more likely to carry weapons and making every confrontation more volatile for our folks. And so there's a human toll on morale and retention and just how safe our employees and customers feel being in our stores. And I think about the partnerships as well. We've made a ton of progress. And I think even with that progress, we recognize there's still a lot of work to do to connect better across other retailers and with law enforcement. It's, fragmented technologies and different rules of the road. And so today, the way that we're operating is far beyond what it was. I think back just, a few years ago, and, the way we collaborated through text message threads and WhatsApp and Signal, and it was all over the place. And so there's a lot of bright spots ahead of us with the technology that we've seen collaboration being part of the design and really helping to create some sort of a real-time information sharing. And I mean, Nick's on this call. He's guilty of this in the highest compliment. Like the engagement we get with law enforcement partners in a platform where we're identifying folks really quickly, connecting the dots really quickly. It really helps kind of showcase what's working right now. I think about the investments we're all making across all retailers. There's a ton of investment in technology and processes and resources. I think when it's all said and done, the goal here is to see this journey of an offender, the resolution to be more consistent and something that we have better framework around that can work across the entire nation, not just kind of uniquely based on city and state, municipalities and whatnot. So bottom line for me, 2025, it's more aggressive, it's more organized, it's more complex than ever. I think we say that every single year, but collaboration, data-driven enforcement, and consistent follow-through are really the levers that I think are starting to shift the tide and where we're continuing to focus.
That's awesome. Thanks, Brian. And yeah, I appreciate what you and your team are doing. And I always love a good shout out to Nick down in Gainesville. I see he threw some messages in the chat. So I think seeing what you're able to do with, officers and out there in the environment and that real-time collaboration. And it just takes that one breadcrumb, right? That one breadcrumb to take it from an unknown individual to a known individual to break open a case. And the faster we can do that, the more impact we can have on this. So it's awesome to have someone like Nick on the call who's done that a few thousand times, probably just in the last couple of days. And so when we think about law enforcement, we've got the unique challenge here in the United States of 18,000 jurisdictions. We've got a lot of jurisdictional boundaries we have to think about. And Brian, to your point, that impacts how, as a retailer, how I interact with law enforcement, and it'd be great if we can streamline that a bit more. But I'd love to just go to a couple of our law enforcement officers on the panel. So Raul, I'm going to start with you because, not because you were a former Fed, but because you were able to unify a lot of that intelligence that was out there around retail crime. But I'd just love to know, from your perspective, Raul, what are you seeing? What are you hearing from your friends, partners, former colleagues when it comes to retail crime on the law enforcement side?
Yeah, Bobby, thank you. It was going back a few years. I think what DHS did is they made a decision to do more, right? So the federal statutes that exist enable to tie crime across the country, whether it can be a Hobbs Act or a Manns Act or a conspiracy, money laundering. That's what we decided to do with HSI. But what I've seen since those 2 to 3 years, 4 years now since Operation Boiling Point is the changing of the guard of other federal agencies jumping into the game, at least more vocally. In particular, in Michigan, I was really excited to see about a year ago that the U.S. Postal Service signed an official agreement, and it went out in the media, to work with the great team up in Michigan. The FBI working cases from New York to California on violent crime. South American theft groups continue to impact us in the jewelry space and the home invasion, right after they're hitting multiple stores across the country. And then obviously the financial crimes with skimmers and the crews going across the country impacting on gift card fraud those are the ones that continue to impact all of us. What I will say is in the last 3 weeks, having had the pleasure to see folks at the CC Rock, Texas Orca, and LA Orca, the changing of the guard is the prosecution coming out very vocally and saying, no more. We need to do more, and we got to figure this out together. Really strong statements from DAs and some prosecuting attorneys that in the past, I might not have seen that when we first launched in 2000. And that's kind of what I've been seeing, Bobby. And it all comes down to this ecosystem. How can we get information shared as soon as possible? And there's nothing more critical than starting at the ground level, the local level, the state level. So I'm excited to see Lieutenant Kim jump in here as well, because they are the tip of the spear. They're dealing with it every day. And we wouldn't be able to do anything in the federal space without our partners at the state and local level. So I'll turn it over back to you, sir.
See, Raul's already starting to do my job as the moderator. He's passing the question over to you, Lieutenant Kim. How are you? What's the state of retail when you think about everything that you've experienced at the local, jurisdictional level, and what are you seeing, feeling, and hearing?
I'll just build what I'm going to say off of what Raul said. He pretty much hit the nail on the head. What we're seeing right now is we're seeing a lot of attention being paid to the retail theft space right now. The reality, the cold and hard reality is that today's organized retail theft crew is also potentially the same one that's going out there doing armed robberies. And that's not just anecdotal. I've personally seen that myself. At this point where we're at, so many different organizations, federal, local, and even in the retail space, all have their own data information. And the $1 million question becomes, how do we deconflict that information quickly? Because I will only have one piece of that pie, and Raul will have another piece of that pie. And if there is no deconfliction system or a way and mean to deconflict that, then I'm never going to know that Raul has a much bigger case, and I have something that Raul wants, and Raul has something that I want. And we need to break down those silos and really streamline that process, which is a good place to be. And I think we're moving closer and closer every day.
Yeah, and that insight's really powerful, right, Lieutenant? You've talked about different pieces of the puzzle, and a lot of the times, and up until really technology in the last couple of months, couple of years, it's been all about partnerships, right? It's, Raul is probably the most connected person I have ever met in my entire life because of those partnerships, right? He's as he was at AHSI, he embedded ingrained with different jurisdictions, different retailers. Brian, I'm sure your teams were doing the exact same thing. How do you outreach with a Lieutenant Kim, with a Nick at Gainesville PD? How do you build those bridges manually so that when you do get the piece of the puzzle, you can deconflict faster? And I think that's really where, when we start to think about how we can accelerate is those public-private safety partnerships that we have out there. So back to you, Lieutenant Kim, what does a successful public-private safety-focused, retail crime-focused partnership look like in your neck of the woods? And maybe give some examples of what you've seen look really good in that space.
One of the interesting things, and Raul had talked about it earlier, the Los Angeles Organized Retail Crime Association for us in our region has really blown up. And it's been a really helpful place to kind of get everyone on the same sheet of music. But I want to drive it back down to, instead of the LA Orca having these big symposiums, I want to drive it down to a more kind of organic, local level. And I want to drive this to, let's say, the frontline supervisors and the managers that are in this group right now that oversee young LPAs, young officers, young detectives. I remember one of my first assignments many, many years ago was actually at a very large shopping mall down in Orange County, and I was assigned there for 3 years. And I got my first taste of organized retail crime. My very first assignment by that sergeant was to take a box of business cards and literally go store to store and write down my cell phone number and give it to the people there. And he told me something that was so powerful at that time that I never really understood the depth of. And what he told me was, he said, you are only going to be as good as your network. And networking is huge. Having everyone in this right here in your mobile device and being able to pick up the phone and call is huge. So I bring it back to, some of the managers and supervisors in this room. What about sending your LPAs, instead of talking to the community specialist at their police department, what about challenging them to actually go and introduce themselves to the detectives at the detective bureau? What about reaching into your budget and pulling out $60 and going with donuts? Cops love donuts. Taking some donuts over to the detectives, or bringing a couple carafes of coffee and tossing a bunch of business cards on there. Those detectives will eat that up. They will take that. They will take those cell phone numbers on there and they will call your LPAs. And this is what we want to do. We want to bridge kind of these data silos together through people. That's so incredibly powerful. And we can make a lot happen by doing that at a very low level every single day.
Yeah, great insight, Lieutenant Kim. And I saw Seth he wanted to come off of mute because he wants to I know we can do more to break down those silos beyond just people to people, but we're going to get there. Don't worry, Seth. I want to talk about it too. Us geeks on this webinar, you and I, we want to get into the tech. We'll get there. But Brian, looking at you on the retail side, right? So it sounds like you've got an in with Lieutenant Kim. A couple rounds of donuts will help there. But what looks good on the retail side, and what are maybe you're doing at REI to push these, public-private partnerships and to push further and lean into some of these jurisdictions that maybe you've had some pain points with? What's working for you guys?
Yeah, I'd say from the retailer's perspective, the best partnerships, they don't start when there's already a crisis. However, in those moments, they're actually really great to kind of galvanize a connection between your law enforcement partners, because you got sort of a shared moment there. But they start well before that. And, we fully embrace, spending time with your local, organized retail crime alliances, heading to conferences, and really connecting on a very local level. And to me, it's more than just a business card exchange. It's really trying to connect and have kind of a shared purpose. And so understanding what's important to the community and sharing kind of what's important to us, taking the time and, and having law enforcement, invite them to the store, let them see the store teams. I think there's something really tangible about the safety that those, the employees feel when they get more familiar with their local law enforcement. Usually it's the same faces. And so they're not a stranger. They're a part of the community. And so having moments, whether it's a thing with like coffee with a cop or some sort of a cleanup plan, a trail cleanup thing, or, a bike repair thing, whatever it might be, having those shared moments and building a real deep community relationship, I think helps to meet the moment when it really is important. And so things like networking and shrinking your network, it becomes a lot easier when you do it more often. And getting it in your phone. I feel like maybe some folks may have felt attacked about the Rolodex. I personally have a couple of old business card boxes that are just stuffed with business cards once I scan them in, but I just can't get rid of them because I feel like there's just something really beautiful about this archaic technology. I don't know. But to really, make those connections, those networks become your friends and, your mentors and your advocates, and who are really watching, with you in the same shared purpose.
People helping people, right? And that's really what it's all about there. And I think, Brian making a good point is it's not just in those moments, those critical high pressure moments. It's what happens after those moments. It's what happens, on a random Tuesday, just swing by and say hi to some detectives. I think that's a really valuable point. Is it's a continuous investment in those partnerships, and it's important to do that. Lieutenant Kim, you hinted at a little bit around the deconfliction and everyone's got their own different systems. I'm sure there's some pain points that are there with those. So, Raul, looking at you from the federal level and from your HSI days, what were some of those friction points you saw between sectors, jurisdictions? How did you see them addressed, and what are you seeing that's new and coming out that's making an impact in that space?
Yeah, Bobby, thank you. It's the same exact problem when you're dealing with drugs, human trafficking, national security, and or ORC cases. It comes down to who has information and how quickly can we deconflict that. The federal government takes that very seriously on the drug side, and there's centers of excellence to help agents avoid from addressing the same investigation and or preventing a blue on blue. I think that's critical in ORC as well. You wasted time, and we didn't get into this earlier, but you referenced my memory on police officers are very busy. The frontline force are dealing with all kinds of issues, gun charges, drugs, and a litany of other problems. And sometimes when you don't clarify the importance of how ORC is part of that ecosystem of crime, you might not get the attention. So I think it's important to focus on the deconfliction. It's important to focus on not wasting time. And I think that's what Auror does beautifully, right? Just having the platform, the ability to look at the repeat offenders, to share information. And this integration, as we're going to get into it later with Axon, just kind of solves that problem in trying to figure out we can't produce more police officers by a snap of a finger. It takes a long time to get them on the force. And then it's going to be more about that system integration, utilizing the platforms that are existing today, and then really trying to duplicate those efforts that we did on the federal side when we did deconfliction on drug cases, using those intelligence learned lessons to the ORC side, and really getting that information into the right hands, and then getting that feedback loop to the retailers. Always leave that as the most important thing. Retailers need to know the cops are doing something, investigators are doing something with that information. And there is some information that can be shared. So the more we can do that, the better it helps everybody as we're doing these cases.
Awesome. Thanks, Raul. Yeah. your points around it's not easy to create more law enforcement officers, right? That takes time. I know you and I were talking about this a couple weeks back. I was with some command staff and at the NYPD, and we were talking through recruiting classes and everything that they're thinking about retirements. And one of the lieutenants we were with, he said, "Well, you got to remember, our largest recruitment class that we ever had at the NYPD was the recruitment classes after 9/11." And so now we're coming up on retirement age for those individuals. So their largest, the largest class of law enforcement that we probably saw across the US is now at that age where they can start pulling their papers and start retiring. And so when we think about that, and like to me, that was like, whoa, that was an aha moment of, okay, now I understand. And then you start to think about everything else that's happened, right? With, the civil unrest, the way that law enforcement is looked at from a professional lens. And I think that that's all changing, but it's just there's not a lot of people signing up for this heroic role in our community that's needed. And so we have to start thinking through, to your point, Raul, like what technology can we put in this spot? How can we help with that, right? We've got fewer people. How can we start to help allow them to do more with less? And so Seth, kind of looking at you, the trusted technologist on the call here. What are you all seeing, and what are you seeing from your experience, from Axon's experience? Like, how do we start to break down these friction points between these different sectors that are out there?
I love this conversation because it's about trust, right? And back when I was doing ORC at Target, it was just what Raul and Lieutenant Kim were saying is you have to build trust with these different agencies and with different partners that you have in the ORC world, i.e. different ORC investigators from different companies. The same thing transitions over to technology. As we use technology and bring it on board to be a force multiplier, you have to find trust in that technology. And that's what I love about this partnership between Auror and Axon. Auror being the most trusted and best platform out there for intelligence, and Axon already having evidence sharing with law enforcement is trusted on that side. And it brings me back to, the 100,000-foot view of like, it's traditional Lean Six Sigma, right? Meaning I'm going to look at this whole problem of going from the retail crime to how do I build this case to how do I share that with law enforcement? How do I get that to a prosecuting authority? With this partnership, it's all there. And in my previous life, a great illustration was kind of anticlimactic because we needed to share a case with FBI that was going on. And usually that's like this big, long process to do that. And in my old days, it was a 3-ring binder that I would rush over to the office and hand it over to them. And they'd be like, thank you, maybe. Right. Today, it was, like a minute and a half of clicking in the system and like, okay, they got it. All right. That agent now has all the evidence they need from us. I guess we'll go fight more crime. That's the beauty of it, right? Is because we're looking at it from this longer Lean Six Sigma practice, and we're removing some of those barriers between sharing securely between different agencies. Chain of custody is improved, right? There's no more, I got in a car accident while I was, driving down to the agency to drop off the paperwork and what happened to the binder. Then like, you don't have to worry about that, right? It's all there. All the data is there and it's easy all the way through prosecution. So that's what I'm most excited about. And, building that trust and finding solution providers that can do that and have that full stream, again, is challenging. But we have it. We have it here.
That's awesome. And just to clarify, Seth, like in your before Axon, when you're talking about transmitting that evidence to the FBI, and I'm sure, Brian was probably involved in that as well. So Brian, feel free to come off of mute and jump in here. Seth, so just so I'm clear, you had your evidence packet, you pressed a couple of buttons from your Auror platform, and that all of that evidence, all of what you would have built in a binder and PowerPoint got digitally transmitted to the FBI. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and how do you see that impacting a lot of this work that we do manually in and out of the retail to law enforcement transfer?
Bobby, I'd be overcomplicating it by saying any more than the example that you just gave of literally it was a couple clicks of taking it out of, from Auror, putting it into evidence.com and routing it to the exact agent from the FBI. That's exactly what happened. And the impact is they have that evidence, right? Lieutenant Kim talked about it earlier. So did Raul. getting that evidence in real time within minutes is critical, right? I know we'll talk about it later, but the crime sharing platform we've worked on and we've released together is kind of that same thing of, if I am a law enforcement officer and I now see everything that I need in one spot coming from all these different retailers, that's a beautiful thing. That's a lot of the work that we do at ORC conferences all over and ORC meetings every month or every few weeks of talking about the usual suspects, right? And trying to put that all together. That's challenging. But now with technology and with trust between those individuals and trust on that technology as well, we're just breaking down those barriers and they're gone. And now we can actually build cases faster, right? And solve them faster so we can go get more cases and keep our team safe and bring profitability to our organizations.
Awesome. And Brian, you've put in, not only that, the retail crime hub technology that Seth was mentioning, but you've got, body worn cameras. You've got a couple other different things you've been using over at REI. Just walk us through, some of those different tech tools that you've started to deploy. How is it making your teams feel safer? How is it accelerating those partnerships with law enforcement when it comes on the trying to get charges, trying to get prosecution going?
Yeah. For us, I think it comes down to two things: confidence and connection. And when I think about on the confidence side, when our staff has, when we went through the robust piloting and testing, and it's still true today, when they wear their body worn cameras, it changes the dynamic of a conversation. They don't feel like they're alone. They feel like the individual, whether it's an aggressive customer or shoplifter, they tend to react differently. It has a natural de-escalation method to it. And there's a record. There is nothing like reviewing a situation, an event, and then looking at CCTV video and like thinking you have all the answers, and then you look at the body worn camera and you're like, way more information and way more context about what that individual is experiencing. And so it's really helped drive that sense of like understanding what's really happened and really driving accountability. We learned really quickly some things that we wanted to adjust and grow and do differently. And so we got to really get a glimpse into that and change and develop our teams more specifically to those interactions. And it gives us a little bit more peace of mind understanding what's going on out there. And I know there's a roadmap with this technology to enable more real-time intervention and partnership. And so we're really excited to see how that continues to drive that connection. And then when I think about the Retail Crime Hub, and we've seen the connection with law enforcement inside of our platform really just thrive. It's grown hand over foot. Every single day there's a new officer in there contributing to information, collaborating on investigations. And so I think the more real-time intelligence that we get, it really tears down the isolated reporting and it drives the collective action and really helping to pull things forward really fast. I mean, from our folks' feedback is clear. I mean, these tools don't just make it easier, but they make them feel safer and supported. And frankly, to me, it's priceless in today's environment.
Nick from Gainesville PD mentioned just, some of the pain points that are out there for law enforcement when it comes to getting that video from retailers. And Brian, you make an awesome point, right? Like you put a body worn camera on an individual and you start to see a whole different view, right? And more intelligence than you would have had before. Not only does it de-escalate the safety situation, it's giving you far more intelligence. So you've got more video that now you have to manage, transfer, and get to law enforcement, but it's painful for law enforcement. So Lieutenant Kim, like you've obviously got maybe some battle scars around transferring video as I'm reading there. Like what's that experience like for you, trying to get the video from the retailers, trying to make that video happen, trying to work the case for them? Just give us some real world experience that you've had on that.
Sure. I think we've all been there. We'll have the video ready for you later today. Okay. We'll send probably a patrol officer later in the evening and we'll go pick up a USB, thumb drive, CD-ROM, you name it, right? Then we bring it over here. We don't have any CD-ROM players. We don't have any Blu-rays. The formatting's not correct. It's a weird file that doesn't register. Our IT won't let us play it. I mean, I could go down a very long list of just the technical problems that can come about. A lot of officers are pretty clever. They've found workarounds. They'll use their body camera to record the video that they're seeing at the scene. Pretty clever. Legally, there might be some issues with that, with some foundation issues, but neither here nor there. But it really comes down to finding a clean way to get the video. And someone else had mentioned it, is really kind of increasing the speed at which we can do this, the speed and efficiency. Because at the end of the day, all these crimes, all these ORC related crimes are no different than major narcotics, major organized crime cases. They're all serial in nature. They're going to happen again. They all have multiple conspirators. There's multiple people involved in this game, and they all communicate with each other, typically by cellular devices. So the sooner we can get the critical evidence, the sooner we can tap into that and take down these organizations and stop them from committing more crimes.
Yeah, you think about the USB, the CDs, all like we've all been there. And then the other piece on all of that is just how unsecure that is. Okay, you can encrypt the USB, but people can break that pretty easy. So now you have that, plus you have the chain of custody. You've got a lot of risk there. Raul, in your Auror days over the last few years, what are you seeing that's happening to, try to streamline a lot of that process? I know Seth talked about being able to, digitally transfer that, but what are some of the other things that you're seeing out there right now that's helping solve some of those pain points there?
Yeah. So the key words there were clean. You want clean evidence. What I see in the field still today, and unfortunately, is just part of what we see as officers are working on group me's and WhatsApps and text strings, and they're sharing photos, and those are going to get contested in court at some point. So you want to be able to transfer digital evidence as fast as possible, and that's what the Retail Crime Hub does. It also gives them an opportunity to see the consolidated data that we host, right? That who are the repeat offenders, the repeat vehicles, the top offenders, all that in one secure dashboard for them to be able to use and really brief their management. This is where we get into a deeper conversation with folks at the lieutenant's level and above. Do you want to see a holistic view of what's impacting your communities from your retailer's perspective going into the platform? So one quick example on an FBI case, again, extreme amounts of evidence needed from this retailer, one of the bigger retailers out there. Would have been almost impossible to do the transfers with the old historic way. Having quarterbacked the case with the retailer and the FBI agent, we saw resolution very quickly. And this was about 6 months ago. And that was just the volume of data that they needed. It just was not going to happen the old-fashioned way. So I think clean, secure, it passes the mustard for it being able to be sent to court, and then being able to communicate back and forth, Bobby, within the platform to see if there's additional evidence required, either statements or video.
Awesome. Brian, you talked a lot around deploying the body-worn cameras, leveraging that intelligence, sharing directly into Axon evidence. Like when you're thinking about you're putting it on store associates, right? Like you're putting the body-worn camera on store. It's a different approach than we've ever done. Or you're putting on, different individuals than maybe your loss prevention professionals. Like, how are you preparing your teams, Brian, to be ready for that high-risk situation and be able to de-escalate them? What does that look like internally for you all at REI?
So today we currently equip our AP staff with body-worn cameras, and even with the amount of policies we write, I think the biggest thing is still anchored in safety first. Hazard recognition is important. Like if you're going to approach a situation that looks like it's going to be hazardous, you don't approach the situation, right? You allow it to unfold. And one of the things that we have really leaned into with policies, whether it's our policy around anybody dealing with shoplifters or even our folks, is the enabler here. It's not a matter of like, hey, it's not that we don't care about what's happening. We want you to be safe. And that's number one. And what really helps us generate traction on cases is information. And so it's going to be a heated moment. If you can figure out how to de-escalate, take note of what's happening, descriptions, what they took, what they got into, tattoos, scars, everything you can think of, that information is going to empower our ability to solve this. Somebody running out, that's not going to be as helpful as getting as much information and facts. And so we've really anchored into, here's how you contribute to the success of this program as an employee. This is what makes a difference. And then reporting. And so doing the reporting and getting thorough reporting has been one of the greatest unlocks for us stitching things together, and also reducing the amount of events or violent events in the stores where somebody may have historically wanted to step in and try to stop the shoplifter or try to prevent something from happening, where we don't want to put them in harm's way. So that's extremely important. And, making sure that we've leaned into the appropriate training that has come with what we've learned through those exercises. And so de-escalation training has been absolutely critical. And even taking that de-escalation training a step further and looking at interacting with the unhoused community and things like that, the mentally ill. And so making sure that you really push into those interactions so that they show up the right way and you're not left kind of guessing what to do in that moment. So I think the outcome with all the right policies and tools is making sure that everyone feels protected and empowered, that they can contribute to this very frustrating environment that we're in, and that they understand that our values as an organization line up directly to what we ask them to do each and every day, and that their safety is at the forefront.
And Brian, you mentioned a little bit around, success metrics and knowing that the training and the approach you've taken is working. Like, what metrics or KPIs are you all tracking across all of this different technology around the ecosystem that you've put in to make sure that it is successful and your efforts are working?
It's an interesting question because there's a lot of KPIs that we want to understand. We start to think about the escalation rates. And during our pilot, we were able to really clearly see that. And so we're working on ways to bring some of those KPIs to life. What I will share is we've been on this platform just a few years now. And so I would tell you the shift in what we can see today to what we could have seen historically is astronomically different. And with a little bit of data science behind it, I think the meaningful leading indicators of what's working and what's not working is to come. So we've got a lot that we're still exploring. I think specific to body-worn cameras, we really wanted to look at de-escalation rates to make sure that we understood that it was really doing the thing that we said it was going to do. And then we look at, the conversion between events and investigations and how those show up and even law enforcement referral rates.
Awesome. And Raul, from your perspective, hearing and working with a lot of law enforcement across the country, plus the retailers, what are some of those metrics that you're hearing people are tracking, or any of those success stories that are out there around this approach?
This stat, I always reference it. So by connecting the dots between the persons of interest and the vehicles of interest across the stores in Auror, 63% of those retail crime events reported in Auror have ended in a positive outcome, which means prevented an apprehension, deterred, and or goods were recovered. But in one particular retailer that we know that uses Auror over the course of the last 2 years, the quickness to report the crime under 4 minutes has been really instrumental in getting that done, frees up the store managers and frontline detectives and folks to do their other job, and then getting the prosecution accepted by police, generating one in particular, 18% more investigations taken by police. And then once they're accepted, 82% conversion rate with a crime charge because of the ease of it being reported and then it being accepted by police. So it's that ecosystem, that ethos of continuous information, but streamlining those efforts in a way that you just can't do manually, Bobby. You just can't do it the old-fashioned way.
Awesome. And Seth, looking to you from the technology lens, what are some of those metrics you all are tracking, you think are important to track? How do you think you can make an impact on this, technology approach as well?
Bobby, I just want to caution you. You just asked me about data, so hold my beer. Hang on. Okay. Brian, hit the nail on the head. The very most important thing is about de-escalation and employee safety. That's always going to be the most important piece. But one of the things that I did that will surprise nobody is, of course, when I got here, I opened up a spreadsheet and I started documenting all the possible ROIs across the different solution set that we have. I stopped at 52 because I was like, that's pretty good, right? Like 52 different calculations, but those are across a variety of areas. Employee safety, like I said, being the number one thing, but there's also deterrence effects, right? So think of if you're using one of our body cams and you go up to an individual and you turn it on and they're shoplifting, but then they, put the item down because they've been caught. That's a shrink improvement, right? So deterrence there's other deterrent effects. Injury reductions due to reduced assault because that body cam is on or other technology is in play. Improved time away from work, improved employee engagement, law enforcement response time, which we've talked about a lot on here, can be quantified. Payroll efficiencies. You talked about, reducing time to collect the information all the way down to just a couple minutes, saving on training costs by using agentic AI on any device to do training as part of our suite, improve turnover, so on and so forth. So I'll stop there and I'll get my beer back. But there's just so many ROI benefits around how you can utilize technology to be a force multiplier and really show that value to not only your senior leadership team, but your core stakeholders inside a retailer.
Awesome. And then last but not least, Lieutenant Kim, looking at you from the local jurisdiction perspective, what are some of the metrics, success metrics, KPIs that you all are looking at when it comes to addressing the safety at retail locations, addressing retail crime?
So one of the things that I used to do when I was the Bureau Commander of Investigations was we would take a lot of anecdotal evidence. We would take the stories that would come from building relationships. So for example, we have a very large real-time crime center here, and with a huge network of cameras that's all built within the Fusus network. And we have the ability to get eyes on the outside of a retail establishment very quickly as soon as that call comes in. And so we will build stories after the fact, especially when we have a successful prosecution. We will take deconfliction and incorporate that into there. Our goal when we make an arrest is to not just prosecute the crime that you did today, but I want my team to find all the crimes that you've been involved in. And once we find those, we want to prosecute those as well and hold you accountable and to really build out those cases. And when we had those scenarios, we would spread that to other agencies and let them know what is possible when you take a lot of these elements and putting it all together, what is possible. And that's how we've evaluated what's working, what's not working.
Thank you, Lieutenant Kim. Can you just walk through a specific example where that successful public and private partnership broke open a case, got a case closure? How did you get to that outcome, and why did it matter so much?
So I'm a big fan of workflow. I know there's a few people in this group right now who worked with me before. You guys have heard me say it before. Workflow is everything. If you got a toolbox with a bunch of tools and you don't know how to use it, they're useless. You need to know how they all work symbiotically together. So without naming stores or individual cases, I'll try and keep it somewhat generic. In the past, we've had an opportunity to kind of trade places and do sit-alongs, as I like to call them. Brian, you're here in my city. How about you send over one of your LPAs to sit inside of our crime center to see how it all works when the call comes in. Let's take a look at the other side. And then I'm going to take one of my operators and then send them to you because I want them to see how it operates for you guys. When you get eyes on, you see the merch go in the bag and you watch the chain of events to build that expertise. So these are the types of relationships that we have. And because of that, we had an incident one time where we had a window smash. Actually, I think it was a vehicle that was involved. We used to call those crash and grabs, where you use a vehicle. And from that incident, we had multiple people involved. We had eyes on within seconds, and we were able to capture a lot of data from that. Because we had the previous relationship built up with this retailer, we were able to pick up the phone and get certain bits of critical information regarding usage of mobile devices. And we were able to use that as timestamps and build a case and identify these people very rapidly. We then took that information and deconflicted it through some of the pre-existing deconfliction clearinghouses. And we found out that there were multiple other organizations that also had similar cases on the same individuals. Some of these cases were carjacking, armed robbery, as well as multiple other crimes. This case ended up being a successful prosecution where we ended up recovering guns, a lot of stolen property. We were able to return that stolen property back to the retailers, and we were able to take some really dangerous people off the street and stop the bleed, because after that, all of our crash and grabs stopped because they were the ones responsible. It was very effective.
Fantastic. What a great story. And back to your workflow, right? It's all about that workflow, that process, and how do you work that process. So that's awesome. Last question going to you, Mr. Hughes. We talked a lot about different technologies, ways that technology can help aggregate, create bigger cases, can help connect the dots across all of the retailers, can help de-escalate situations, get better video, and then can digitally transfer right to Axon evidence. Seth, and from your perspective, when you think about the next 2-3 years, like where do you see this type of technology going, and how do you see this technology impacting, frontline employees, frontline workers on a safety and loss perspective?
I think there's at least one retailer that is already starting to go down this path, and it's real-time crime, right? And law enforcement agencies have real-time crime centers, but retail doesn't really have that with like one exception, at least that I'm aware of, and they're trying to get into that area. So we traditionally, historically, we've tried to kind of apprehend our way for these type of incidents. And when that doesn't work, or when we're processing somebody and 3 more people walk out the front door, then we go to the investigation mode. And what's happened over the last few years since COVID is that if you think of that being a timeline, that has broadened, right? So we're able to apprehend less because we're focusing more on employee safety because really bad things have happened. And then law enforcement, because of all the extra crime, law enforcement has been struggling to keep up with all of that because of staffing shortages and so on and so forth. So there's this large gap in the middle. And that's where things like Axon operating system comes in, where we bridge all these. I don't care what system you have. That's what Axon OS brings in to be able to see your ALPR system or your LVT towers that you have, or your body worn cameras now, or your CCTV that you have there. Bring it all in together and be able to process that in real time. And if you want, right, all the way up to, really your permission level, you can send that to law enforcement in real time to be able to effect an arrest. Maybe that's out in the parking lot. Maybe with the advent of drone as first responder, which also integrates into our system, you can effect an arrest 15 minutes down the road now, and you don't have to go down that investigation path because you've solved that problem. So real-time crime, going back to the heart of your question, Bobby, that's what's coming down the road. That's what's available now. And I think a lot of folks are trying to figure out how to make that happen. So we're here to help with that with our partners with Auror.
Seth, thank you. Panelists, appreciate you all. We've got a bunch of different systems out there with a bunch of quality intelligence in them around offenders and subjects causing violence in our stores. It's all about unifying that system, pulling it together into a cohesive picture that can easily be shared with law enforcement. And we can do that through the technology that does exist today. And it just takes a bit of conversation with your IT folks. I know those aren't always the funnest conversations, but it's important. And it's definitely something that can happen. And Brian, I appreciate you, and Lieutenant Kim, appreciate you sharing kind of your perspective on what you've seen in that space. Thank you for listening to the Retail Crime Intelligence Podcast by Auror. Don't forget to follow and subscribe on your favorite podcast app.